Medical Mariner Inc.
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you live from our Norfolk studio, home of the Atlantic Fleet, Medical Mariner Inc.
Hello and welcome to Medical Mariner Inc. I'm your host, Paul Stewart. This podcast is going to cover my journey in life, some things I have learned. We will talk about medicine, about PA school, about changing careers, about tattoos, and scuba diving, technical diving. Might even talk about skydiving in there, growing things, resilient living, training, anything else that comes to mind. I will attempt to get some folks on here now and then to talk about things with us, and we'll see where this journey goes. Thanks for listening, and now here's today's episode. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Medical Mariner Inc. Today's episode is called Fun African Style. This is going to talk about some of the fun things you get to do if you ever go over to Africa. Most of the things I know about are in Kenya and Uganda because those are the areas I have spent some time. I would love to go over and explore more. Specifically, I would really love to go diving off of Zanzibar. I would love to go down and go bungee jumping at Victoria Falls, but those are going to have to wait for another time, and I'm not going to talk about those because I don't know a whole lot about them yet because I haven't been there and done that. But I have been there and done that with a few things, and we're going to talk about those today. One of the places I really enjoy a lot in Uganda is the Adrift Camp. The Adrift Camp is just down below the source of the Nile on Lake Victoria, and it is in a town called Jinja. If you listen to a previous episode, Jinja is actually the capital of one of the 4 Ugandan kingdoms, the Busoga Kingdom. I did not know that the whole time I was hanging out in Jinja, but now I know. I have stayed in Jinja a couple of times. The first time was when my daughter, Kaden, was 14, and she and I went over early for a mission trip. She actually got food poisoning the first day we were there. She went whitewater rafting with me on the Nile a couple of times and also watched me do some bungee jumping. The Adrift Camp is owned by a fellow named Yassine. The first time I went there, I decided to do some bungee jumping. They have a bungee jump that's 143 feet over the Nile River. I'd always told myself I was never going to bungee jump before I did that. I'd done skydiving before. Somehow I decided that bungee jumping was more dangerous. No, not really. It's like most things. You don't assess the risk well when you don't know about it. You don't know how to do it. If you are ever going to try bungee jumping and you've ever heard a nightmare story about a bungee cord snapping, which has been known to happen in operations that do not maintain their bungee cords well, but it's extremely rare. Just remember that bungee cords break at the extreme stretch of the bungee cord, and that's usually not much of a fall at all once all is said and done, and you've slowed down all the way to an almost terminal point at that point. Did some jumps off of their bungee there above the Nile when I was there with my daughter, and then we went whitewater rafting down the Nile. I have also been there when I was living in 2014. My friend Derek O'Brien and I showed up and stayed in Jinja for a few days, and Derek had come over on a short-term mission trip, so I had come out of Fort Portal where I was living to go meet him, and then we were going to hang out in Jinja and do some fun stuff. Now, the first day, Derek and I were planning to go whitewater rafting, but it got canceled due to the fact that they did not have enough people. Whatever the other group was going to come with us, they just had me and Derek, and they said they wanted more people to do whitewater rafting. The Nile's a pretty different river than if you've been whitewater rafting in America. they were asking us if we wanted to do something else that day. And I said, can we rent a couple of bodas from somebody and then drive down to Busia and see my friend Sam? Now, Sam's a guy I know who has done a lot of work with children and things. He actually runs a school in Busia. Busia is a couple hours down the road from Jinja. It took a little while of getting them to understand that I wanted the motorcycles. I should back up and say that a boda is a motorcycle, and that's what they call them in Uganda, boda, because the drivers of the motorcycles travel from border to border, boda. That's how you get that name. So we got these little Boxer 110 motorcycles, and we decide we're going to drive them down to Busia. The first thing I'm used to before you start out on a motorcycle trip is you go and you top off your motorcycle with gas. The attendant at the petrol station thought I was insane when we were doing this, and now I know why. So Derek and I hopped on these motorcycles. We go zipping on down the Jinja Road. We passed this one cop, and she was giving us the stop signal. I kept going. Derek looked alarmed. We get down to Busia. Derek pulls up beside me and goes, "Hey man, I think that cop was trying to get us to stop back there." And I'm like, "Derek, I'm absolutely certain she was trying to get us to stop. And I am not going to pay her any bribe to let us keep doing what we're doing." He's like, "Well, won't we get in trouble?" I'm like, "Derek, did you see a police car?" "Well, no." "Did you see a radio in her hand?" "No." I'm like, "That's right, because she doesn't have those. All she wanted to do was shake us down for some money." We went to Sam's school. He brought the children out and they put on an impromptu program, a school play for us. It was talking to us about the importance of hygiene. We watched the importance of hygiene program. We hopped on our bodas. We rode back to the Adrift Camp. And none the worse for wear, we turned the motorcycles in. The guy who owned them was super happy because now he had enough petrol, that's what they call gasoline, for a few weeks of work on his boda. We had driven from Jinja down to Busia. I'll have to look up how many kilometers it is, but we hadn't hardly drained any of the gas out of those tanks, so they were still nearly full when we gave them back to him, and that's just not something they typically do, so he was super happy about that. Now, the next day, we had another group show up. It was 2 individuals, and they went whitewater rafting with us. Now, the Nile, it's got some big, hairy rapids. There's one right at the beginning where you're going through a lot of rocks, and that's the only place the guides tell you that you can't fall out of the boat. And if you fall out of the boat, it actually is pretty dangerous there. But just about every other place on the river, they will actually intentionally flip the boat over and get you in. It gets some really good, interesting footage when they do that. If you check out my Instagram page, Ink Heavy, it's got some things on there where I've found some videos and I've been posting them and some pictures over the last few weeks, and you'll be able to see those on there if you go check it out. But they flip it over, you get out of the boat, you get to rummage around in the water for a little bit, you get back in the boat, you go on. Sometimes you'll have a still space where you have to paddle for a little bit, and then you'll hit these rapids again. Now, there's one place on the Nile they don't take you, and that's the bad place. I've heard a couple of people have run that on kayaks, but when you're coming up to it, there's this island on one side, and you just kind of hear this little rumble, and they see this little foggy area, and it's a really intense Class 6 rapid. And the interesting thing about the bad place is Yasin owns another property. It's called the Wild Waters Lodge, where they have little chalets that are actually out there in the river on some of the rapids. And they take you out there and you can overlook the bad place while you're in your high luxury lodge. I have not personally stayed at the Wild Waters, but our river guide, who was from New Zealand, he told us that when he came to work there, they had him stay there a couple of nights just to get him a taste of it. And he said it is the swankiest hotel I've ever stayed in. I'll have to take him at his word till I go stay there. It's not cheap. I've looked at the rates. You get past the bad place, you continue on down the river. You go through a few more rapids, some standing waves. And at the end of the day, you're wet, you're tired, but you've had a lot of fun. I almost forgot. When Derek and I first showed up at the Adrift Camp, there's a picture of me hanging over the bar in a big, got to get my shoulder out because I've just had shoulder surgery, swan dive bungee jump. I thought that was pretty cool. I'll have to see if I can find a picture of that someplace. The next day, I decided to do some bungee jumping again. Derek wasn't so much into it. And I believe we went whitewater rafting a second time. But then there was another time where they had a group of people that had showed up at the camp, and they all kept talking about they wanted to bungee, whether or not they wanted to bungee. And the guys who ran the bungee kept, they're like, Mr. Paul, we need you. You must come jump. So I got 6, 8 no charge bungee jumps out of the deal to try to convince these other folks to come bungee. It was fun. Did all the great ones. Did the one where you just lean forward. Did the one where you lean backward, which frankly is a little bit disconcerting. Did some where you dip into the water at the end of the jump. Some where I stayed dry. And then the all fun one where they put you in a chest harness and you just take a run and go diving and go all crazy through the air. I think I've got some videos of that I'll put up on the Instagram account. But yeah, that's the fun you can have at the Adrift Camp. Other fun things to do are go on safari. I've been on safari in both Uganda and in Kenya. Some of the places I've been on safari in Uganda are Queen Elizabeth National Forest. That's over in the western side of the country. You actually cross the equator on the way there. They have a little thing with some concrete model elephant tusks that mark out where the equator is, so you get to cross that on your way. It's kind of like your golden shellback on land for any of you sailors out there. They've got a nice big lake in Queen Elizabeth. You can take a little boat tour of that. Lots of interesting birds. You can see lots of hippos, crocodiles, those kinds of things. When you're out on a bus tour, viewing safari of the area, there's elephants, there's lions, there's all kinds of giraffes and deer. There's also the dreaded Cape buffalo. Of all the big animals that can and will eat you in Africa, the Cape buffalo are probably the scariest because they're just ornery. And while they won't eat you, they have no problem jumping on you and driving you to the ground and grinding you into a pulp. Don't mess with Cape buffalo, but we'll talk a little bit more about them here in a second. Another place I've been on safari is Murchison Falls, which is in the northern part of Uganda. There's a big waterfall there. That's the main attraction. That part is very large. Got to see all kinds of things there. They have lots of Pumbaa, the warthogs. They've got lots of hippos, which they do everywhere, and things like that. But the interesting part of this trip was we stayed at one lodge in the park one day, and then the second day you show up early because there's a Nile River crossing where you have to take a ferry across. And if you don't get there early, they say you have to wait in a long line. Looks like if you get there early, you have to wait in a long line anyway. While we were waiting there, I had a long lens on my camera, and I was hanging back a good ways away from where in the water down by the ferry crossing there was a hippopotamus and her calf. Several of the other Mzungus, I introduced the term Mzungu in a previous episode, can mean one who wanders, can mean white with cash. Basically, it's anybody who's not African in Africa. But anyway, these Mzungus were down there looking really close and taking close-up pictures as they could get of this hippo and her calf. One of the young girls in the group was like, "Hey, Paul, why don't you come down here, take a look at the hippos?" I'm like, no. In case you didn't know, hippos kill more people than lions ever have. and I can't imagine a hippo mother with a calf is anything I want to be anywhere close to, and hippos are shockingly fast when they want to be. We went across the river, we got out there. We were actually driving along in the park in two buses. One of the buses broke an axle right as we were getting up to the falls, and they were getting ready to take people back to the lodge where we were staying that night, and they were trying to pile everyone from two buses into one bus, but they were running out of room, and they asked some of us if they wanted to wait. Me and my friend Jim Wilkie, he actually worked with me on starting a well in Nambi, Uganda. We will probably talk about that at some point in another episode. But we were among the people who decided to stay back at Murchison Falls and wait for the bus. And we waited. And we waited, as that Wilkie will do. And finally we decided, it's only 10 or 15 kilometers back to the lodge. We'll just walk it. So we pack up ourselves. We get ready to start walking out of Murchison Falls Park. And that's where we get approached by someone who pops out of nowhere, one of the rangers, guides in the park, and they say, excuse me, where are you going? They have very distinct speech patterns in Africa. And me and Jim are like, we're just going to walk back to the lodge because it's only 10 or 15 kilometers. We've both been in the military. It's not that far of a walk. And he looks and goes, oh, this is not a bad idea, except for one thing. There is a herd of Cape buffalo. They are moving and they are crossing the road right now, and they will be doing so for quite some time. So it is probably not the best time for you to walk back to the lodge. And we agreed with him and decided not to. And we waited. A few hours later, the bus came back, picked us up, took us to the lodge, and we're getting ready to settle in for dinner. The sun goes down quickly and early at the equator. And we got there, we started having dinner. Everybody's tired from having a long day. We were staying in these huts that had, I think, 4 people to a hut. And so you were supposed to have a guide walk you back from the hall where we were doing dinner to where you were staying after dark, because you're in the park, Mzungu, you must be careful. Well, Jim and this other fellow, Mario Colorado, and I think there was one other guy, we decided we didn't want to wait for a guide because it was taking too long. We were tired and we didn't need no stinking guide. So we go and we start walking back to our huts. And Mario had a flashlight and he was flashing it around, and all of a sudden he goes, ah! I'm like, what's going on? He's like, oh, I saw that eye over there, but it's just that statue of the Cape buffalo. And I looked at Mario and I'm like, man, did you see a statue of a Cape buffalo when we were walking over here in daylight? That herd of Cape buffalo had moved up among the lodges, between the lodge, the eating hall, and the huts. So we had to carefully and watchfully make our way back to our room. Luckily, we did not closely encounter a Cape buffalo, and we survived that. But in the future, we will follow instructions when we are in the park Mzungu. Have also been to Lake Nakuru in Kenya. We one time were over there working in Toro, and we're going up to fly out of Nairobi to go home. We made our way up through Eldoret, stopped at a church that had burned up there in some political violence years before, and then went to Lake Nakuru. The big attractions of Lake Nakuru are rhinoceros, and they also have zebras. They have a lot of zebras. After going to Lake Nakuru, I don't know how many more zebras I ever need to see in my lifetime, because there were thousands of them. They were everywhere. They were like seagulls at the beach in America. Also been to Masai Maru Game Preserve that's out by Nairobi, Kenya, just outside of that. So Masai Maru, I got some really good pictures of elephants. One lion in particular, I will have to try to drag up the picture and paste it in here if I can. of a lion who was resting during the day inside a tree. It's the one time I actually figured out how to use the manual settings on my camera because autofocus kept wanting to focus on the leaves, and I think I did an okay job with this picture. They also have lots of giraffes. Giraffes are called giraffes in Uganda. I actually, while we were in Masamaru, I had an infection in my ankle that I'd gotten from a cut while I was whitewater rafting on the Nile and was taking antibiotics for it. And one of the guides told me that I should go over and have a giraffe lick it because the giraffe saliva is antiseptic because they eat the leaf of the acacia tree. That's what they call an acacia tree. And the acacia leaf has antiseptic properties, and that would help with the infection in my leg. I did not try to get the giraffe to lick my ankle, but supposedly I could have. One other interesting thing about Masamaru Park is my daughter, Caden, was with me when we were over there at that time. And in Masamaru Park, they have a site called the Ivory Burning Site. There was a time when Kenya had the largest stash of ivory held by a government when ivory became outlawed by international treaty because the elephants were being decimated. The government of Kenya took and piled up, I forget, it was in the hundreds of tons, I believe, of ivory into these two large piles, saturated it with diesel fuel, and burned the ivory. And there's two large piles of ash there, and it's called the Ivory Burning Site. Now, when we were at the Ivory Burning Site, we had to go there because there was something wrong with our guide's permit that day, and they wanted him to pull over and wait there. There was a herd of giraffe, like 5 of them, giraffes, that were hanging out at one end of the clearing where the Ivory Burning Site is. And I had Caden go get in frame with the giraffes so I could get a picture of them. And she kept getting closer and closer. And eventually, I stopped her and I said, Caden, you do realize that a giraffe can kill you too. At which point she said, and came back over to be near me. One other really cool place to go in Kenya is the elephant orphanage. They have elephants that they rescued whose parents have died. And they have a feeding time where they call it playtime, where they let the elephant babies come out. And if the elephant babies want to approach you and play with you, they will. We're talking 350 to 500 pound elephant babies. If they want to play, they're going to, and you just have to kind of let them. It's fun. You get to get up close to them. They all are very friendly and come up and want to play with you. And it's a pretty amazing experience. If you ever get the chance to try that, I highly recommend it. I talked about it in the last episode, but if you haven't heard that yet, there is a palace in Fort Portal. The kingdom over there is the Toro Kingdom, and I actually got to meet the Toro King. His name is Oyo. When I was over there in 2014, I got invited into the palace. That's a big deal because my friend Tom Egham, who's been there a million times, a few years earlier, we had been going through Fort Portal, and I had asked him to get us a tour of the Toro Palace. He's like, oh, they don't let white people go there. Well, when I got to go in the Toro Palace, I got to take pictures inside. I asked permission first, and they said I could, and got to prove that, yep, I got to spend some time in the Toro Palace. Probably the only white guy who's done so in a long time. Another fun thing to do if you're in and around Kampala and Entebbe and you've got some time to kill, they've got these interesting little beach clubs that are on the shores of Lake Victoria. They're little sandy beaches. They've got a little bar. They've got some music playing. It's a nice place to go hang out, relax, have some fun. I was over there. Friend of mine who had been to EMT school with me, Lizzie Owens, I was kind of her mission trip dad. We had several hours to wait before our flight was taking off out of Entebbe, so we went over there and we hung out on the beach. And it turned out it was pretty cool. We were hanging out with my friend Emma. Emma is a cousin of another friend of mine, Eric Bosa, over there. And Emmanuel, he's an interesting guy, has a very distinctive voice. I love Emma and I miss him. Can't wait to go back and see him. One of the other really fun things we got to do was one time I was over in Uganda on my birthday and decided to have a birthday party and invite everybody and set it up. Well, we got to go to the Toro Country Club. And I don't know how many members there are there, but we invited folks like Mohammed's one of the big shopkeepers in town. Mr. Gergani, he runs the concrete plant that Toro is known for. So we had Matesh, who does the local money changing. But they're all kind of the guys who run the town and everything. And we got to go over there. We had the party. It was fun. Everybody got to have a whole lot of food. I got to learn how to play snooker. If you've never played snooker, it's like billiards, but enormously frustrating. It must have been developed in Scotland. That's another fun thing I've gotten to do while in Uganda and Kenya, and I look forward to going over there at some point and doing many more fun things. Hopefully that gives you an idea of some things you can do if you're over there and have some time to kill and want to go have some fun. So that's it for today. I appreciate you listening, and thanks for keeping up with the show, and thank you. The background music Perspectives was created by Kevin McLeod at incompetech.com. It is licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. The website from which the music was downloaded is http://creativecommons.org/licenses/by/4.0. Thank you for listening to Medical Mariner Inc. Medical Mariner Inc. is written, produced, and hosted by me, Paul Stewart. If you wish to make suggestions for content, leave me some comments, or have anything you would like for me to know, you can email me at medicalmarinerinc@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. To support the show, please give me a 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen on, like, and subscribe to the show. Thanks, and I hope you have a good day.